Are you into tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, and Monster of the Week? Sweet. Roll with me. Welcome to Roll With Me. My name is Michael, and I have been absolutely fascinated with tabletop role-playing games since I was just a kid in high school, and oh my god, I'm almost 30. Today I'm going to say a few things that may be a little controversial in the gaming community, but before we get into that, I'm going to take a minute and thank my sponsors, the people who make all of this happen. Jetpack Comics and Games in Rochester, New Hampshire is just the coolest comic shop around. It is your one-stop shop for everything from gaming accessories to action figures and trade paperbacks and graphic novels and vinyl pop figures and literally everything that you could ever imagine the world's most awesome super comic book mega store having. Jetpack Comics has it all. They're awesome, super friendly staff. They're super helpful. Everybody that works there knows everything about every kind of game or comic you could ever possibly want to look at. So give them a call at 603-330-X-Men or check them out at jetpackcomics.com. And while you're on the web surfing for local businesses that may carry gaming accessories, why don't you check out my website at www.mossfootcustoms.com. Check us out on Facebook or Instagram at Mossfoot Customs. We make all sorts of crazy... I got some people that I work with that are super great, but I design all of these boxes. We're working on some new things like dice bags and a DM box suite. There's going to be all sorts of crazy stuff happening, lots of giveaways going on, and just check us out on social media and buy the merch. Okay, so today I'm going to tell you all why Monster of the Week and not Dungeons & Dragons is actually the greatest role-playing game of all time. Sorry, nerds, I'm just going to let that one sink in. That's some good tea. Now, before everybody in the community freaks out at me and curses my name forever at the risk of destroying my career in the gaming world, I love Dungeons & Dragons. I do. And Pathfinder, and Numenera, and Star Wars RPG. I love them. They're awesome. They're games that I play. I've put more hours into Dungeons & Dragons than any other game I have ever played. But Monster of the Week just rules. And everybody's entitled to their own opinions, even if they're wrong. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about why Monster of the Week just takes the cake. Now, in case you were not already aware, Monster of the Week by Michael Sands is a fantastic role-playing game. It is super simple, and it is a lot of fun. It takes place in the real world, which is super cool. I mean, like, I guess if we're playing Dungeons & Dragons, we're trying to escape, but there's a lot of escapism here in this book. And I'm just going to read you the intro of this book. It is just pretty wild here. All right. What you've signed up for. When you play this game, most of you will create hunters, people who have devoted their lives to killing monsters. One player will be the Keeper. That's short for Keeper of Monsters and Mysteries. The Keeper will be in charge of designing monsters and mysteries for the hunters to deal with, bringing the world to life, portraying the monsters, and the people the hunters meet. The rest of you will decide how the hunters work together to investigate the weird situations they find, slay the monsters causing the trouble, and save the people in danger. Your hunters aren't normal people. You're not even normal monster hunters. You're the ones who stand out, larger than life, and twice as badass. You can change the world, save it, destroy it, alter it forever. One way or another, you will make a difference. Alright, so we've already arrived at one of the reasons that this game is my favorite game of all time. This book reads like a conversation. The whole book, as you're going through the descriptions of characters that you can play, or even the descriptions of monsters that you can make, everything that you read in this book feels like someone is talking to you in conversation. It feels easy to read and fun to read, almost like you're talking to Michael Sands himself, the creator of the game. And this already puts you in a comfortable place. When you're learning Dungeons and Dragons, it can be extremely daunting. You know, you look up on my shelf at all of the books that I have, and that doesn't even scratch the surface on all of the rules in Dungeons and Dragons. Monster of the Week can be played, of course, Dungeons and Dragons can be played with as little as a player's handbook and a Dungeon Master's Guide, or just D&D Beyond. Now that is an awesome thing that's out there. But Monster of the Week can be played with just the first book. There are expanded classes in the Tome of Mysteries, the second book that's come out in the series, but you just need the Monster of the Week book. The first half is all about playing the game. The second half is about running the game. So if one person around the table has the core rule book, this tiny little Monster of the Week book, which is full of fun illustrations and graphics, and it's just a lot of fun. But you can ostensibly play with just one book around the table, and it's not hard. It's not daunting. You don't have to pass it around as much. The rules are much simpler, much more streamlined, and that's because it takes place in the real world, right? In Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or Numenera, you're working with a fantastical realm, the rules of which are defined by a series of long books or blog entries or you name it. In Pathfinder, sometimes it can feel like I'm doing a long-form calculus problem just to land a hit on a creature. It's too much, too many numbers, it's crunchy, right? For me, at least. I mean, maybe I have a little smooth dum-dum brain, but Monster of the Week is so playable. All you need are 2d6s. The reason we only need these 2d6s is because the success to failure mechanic is so much more grounded and realistic than any other game, and it makes a lot more sense. Instead of rolling a d20 and adding a proficiency bonus and a modifier and doing some other precise calculations to see if you succeed or fail and no other option, this is more of a sliding scale. It's a little more grounded. You roll your 2d6s, you add a small bonus that depends on which playbook you start with, which stat block you start with, and we'll get into a little bit more of that in a bit. But you roll your 2d6s. On a 10 plus, you do exactly what you set out to do. On a 7 and 9, you get what is called a mixed success, right? And you can take the keeper will give you a choice to pay, or a price to pay, a choice to make, or a worse outcome, and then below the 7 is a failure and something goes terribly wrong, right? But this gives us a little more interesting options, right? When you go to stake a vampire through the heart, you can either, get him right in the heart, and that's that, right? Or you get the mixed success, and maybe you get him but not in the heart, right? Or you get him but he hurts you a little bit more when he fights back. All sorts of different opportunities and possibilities. It makes for this really wild collaborative storytelling effort between the keeper and the players. It's even more collaborative than Dungeons and Dragons, where you have the dungeon master doing most of the work. The keeper, in fact, really doesn't have to do a ton of work here. It's a matter of setting up a mystery and setting up a monster in either a real life place or a very realistic place that you've created. For instance, when I ran a campaign of Monster of the Week, I created the fictional town of Raven Creek, California, and sort of designed. I took a couple of nights and I designed how many people lived there, and came up with some of the characters that might live there and the businesses that were there, and drew a little map on some graph paper, and colored it in, and then brought it in the next week, and the party suddenly had all the materials that they needed to go about making an incredible story akin to shows like The X-Files or Supernatural or Buffy the Vampire Slayer or The Dresden Files or all of the other awesome shows that I really like. Actually, playing a session of Monster of the Week plays a lot like an episode of one of these television series. It gets its name from the trope of Monster of the Week, the old school Doctor Who, where every week the Doctor would encounter some new problem that arises. In Supernatural, the first 3 or 4 seasons at least, the Winchester brothers would encounter a new monster and do their research on it and study it and follow it, and by the end of the episode they'd track it down and take it down and save the day. Move on to the next week where it's another mystery. That's exactly what these sessions feel like. And to that end, you can play a session of Monster of the Week that's 2-3 hours with a couple of people and have that be it. Conversely, you can run a Monster of the Week campaign that can go for months and months and months. That's what my friends and I did starting a couple years ago. We started this Raven Creek campaign, and it started out with maybe a werewolf here, a Wendigo there, a vampire here and there, right? And it turned into this massive arc. You can build these villains, these series arc villains that it is their duty now, while they're discovering new monsters every week, maybe uncovering a little bit more about the greater mystery, right? It is so much easier to write a campaign in Monster of the Week than in Dungeons of Dragons, because you're basing things on real world lore and real world places and real world rules. I mean, you can have your monsters, you build your monsters. You don't have to rely on stat blocks and buying all of these different books to find the stats of the monsters and how many hit points they have and what their CR is, right? Or how much experience points they give out. There is a whole separate simple mechanic for experience that gets doled out at every session. Leveling, don't even get me started. It's so much easier and way more fun than in Dungeons and Dragons. And to that end, I forgot what I was talking about. Aliens. You can have your monsters be aliens. You can bring them Bigfoot. You have your party meet Bigfoot. How does that sound? You want one of your party members to be a vampire? You got it. All of the above. You can do it. Anything. Wendigos and Rakshasas and dragons and ghosts and ghouls and all sorts of things. You can do anything. Did I mention aliens? You can bring in aliens. The possibilities in Monster of the Week are actually endless. There are very few rules that cannot be bent or revisited because this whole thing has always been a work in progress. They mentioned in the beginning they want your feedback, and they give you, Michael Sands gives you permission to take the reins and run your game however you want to run it. There are just 12 principles of how to effectively run this game that are super helpful and also kind of fun to read. Number 1, put horror in everyday situations. Number 2, address yourself to the hunters, not the players. Number 3, use the keeper moves, but never use their names. Number 4, be a fan of the hunters. That's my favorite. Be a fan of the hunters. Your players around the table in a game of Dungeons and Dragons, often it feels like, at least for me, often it feels like when I am playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons and we enter a combat, it often feels like I'm rooting against my players. Like, I'm playing the monsters, and I'm rolling for the monsters, and I am really pushing for those monsters to deal some damage to my players, and it's a little less collaborative than I think maybe they intended it to be. But in Monster of the Week, Michael Sands tells us to be the biggest fan of our players. No matter what, they will face dangers, and they will face horrors and nightmares, but through it all, their cheerleader is the person running the game. And that's just pretty special. Number 5, build up a coherent mythology of the world as you play. And that's so important, right? Because we're building the world together, we can designate the new rules, the supernatural, spooky rules, right? That don't exist in our mundane life, or maybe they do. Magic is real. Number 6, nothing is safe. Kill bystanders and minions, burn down buildings, let monsters be slain. Man, I had a lot of fun with this rule. I blew up a building in Seattle. Not really, please NSA or FBI or whatever. I didn't really blow up a building in Seattle. This is going to be really bad if like a building blows up in Seattle now, and I've just said it on YouTube. Number 7. Name everyone they meet. Make them seem like normal folks. That was so hard for me. Creating real-life, realistic characters is a little less simple than in Dungeons and Dragons with my NPC codex that we talked about last week. They threw me through the ringer. They would put me, my party, they put me in a lot of situations where I had to make up a lot of names and a lot of character voices and a lot of personalities really quick. But still, I mean, they're real people, so I mean, you could be like, this is Sam Johnson, and this is Dan Bronson. But right here is an instance of Michael Sands acknowledging the deep need for immersion in a game, right? You want to make the characters that they meet feel real. And it is so important. I just talked about this for 25 minutes last week, of how important it is to immerse your players into the game, and here it is right here in the rules of Monster of the Week. Number 8, ask questions and build on the answers. Man, is it nice and freeing as a keeper rather than a dungeon master to not have all the answers, right? We can sit around this table with our friends and ask them what they think is going on, right? Ask them what is happening. And as they come up with answers that maybe you weren't thinking of, I mean, it gives you ideas and builds and builds. And this is like a seasoned DM trick for Dungeons and Dragons that nobody really talks about these days. And again, here it is, right in the rules for Monster of the Week. Number 9. Sometimes give the hunters exactly what they earned rather than everything they wanted. I mean, it's hard to argue with that. It makes the game feel real and give the stakes more stakiness. But even though we get to basically sandbox the rules of the world as we build them, it can be a little too much if we give our hunters everything. Man, I had a player who really, really wanted a grenade launcher the entire game, and I really held out until he had done some really heroic shit, and then he earned that grenade launcher, and then he got it, and I think he died. Yeah. Too little, too late? Just a disclaimer, the hunter died, not the player. That would be really bad. Really bad. FBI, NSA, steer clear. Hunter died. Not the player. Not a real hunter, a character it's a game. Number 10. Think about what's happening off screen. Right. So much like these shows like Supernatural and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and all this stuff, we see these scenes with the heroes, right, the protagonists of the show, and they're doing their business, and then it'll cut away to something else that's happening, letting the audience in on something that's happening with the greater mystery or something that's happening that our heroes don't know about. And it is supremely important to keep this in mind while we're playing this game, right? Because the audience ostensibly is the keeper, or anybody reading my notes maybe, I don't know. Anyway, this rule reminds us to keep in mind all of the movements that are happening just off the camera, right? All of the things that are brewing around them. It gives us the opportunity to create a scenario that happens across town while they're investigating something in the woods, and now all of a sudden maybe they need to split the party, and now there's some more off-screen, split-screen, hard-cut TV magic that we can do to collaborate this story into something a little more interesting. Number 11. You don't always have to decide what happens. Again, man, Any rule that takes the work off of the person running the game's shoulders and kind of helps the party hold it up, whew, that's a friendly rule in my book. And number 12, everything is a threat. Everything. Now, in a very Call of Cthulhu reminiscent way, this rule keeps our hunters on their toes at all times, because at any given moment, the bystander or citizen that they may be talking to could turn out to be a werewolf, or a vampire, or a witch, or a ghoul, or a lich, or a ghost, spooky, or an alien. Did I mention aliens? It is the atmosphere of Monster of the Week while you are playing it that makes it so much fun. Like I talked about last week, put on a little spooky music and maybe some creaky wooden board house sounds as they're exploring some potentially haunted mansion, and dim the lights down low and make everything really spooky and scary, and use a little bit of flowery descriptive language, and all of a sudden your players are actually scared sitting around the table. What a game. Character creation in Monster of the Week is quick, it's simple, and it's honestly kind of a blast, with mechanics on how you met all of the other members of your party, and a delineation of different stat blocks that you can choose from that are offered by each playbook, or class as you would call it in Dungeons & Dragons. And there's all sorts of super fun playbooks like The Wronged, which is somebody who may have had their family killed by a certain kind of monster and has spent their life studying that monster and hunting them. Or The Professional, someone who works for a government agency, that a shadowy government secret agency that hunts down what goes bump in the night. Or there's The Hex, a real-life magic user who burns sage and uses crystals and old pagan Wiccan rituals to cast spells, or the Spellslinger, a literal wizard. You can even be something called the Mundane, which is just a person. Nothing special, just a person. Pretty good at getting abducted by bad guys and attacked by monsters. Just a person. You can be the Monstrous, a vampire or werewolf or ghost or half ghoul or zombie or whatever kind of monster that you possibly might want to be. You could be the monster. What? You can be the chosen one. You can be the expert. You can be a goddamn luchador. There is a luchador class. You can be a luchador from Telemundo. You can be a gumshoe private detective. You can be a mad scientist. There is virtually no limit on what you can do, and the tropes that you can pull from television and movies and all sorts of sci-fi, paranormal, spooky media that you could put into this game. There is just so much fun to be had. I don't see Dungeons & Dragons letting me be a luchador in their rulebook. And there's some pretty solid examples of how to actually play the game by watching or listening to people play out there. I did a couple of real play episodes in season 1 of my podcast, and the Adventure Zone, their second full season of real play, was a game of Monster of the Week, and the McElroy brothers just do an excellent job covering the rules and doing sort of a step-by-step playthrough of a really well-written campaign. Good job, Griffin McElroy. Well done. A lot of cool stuff in there, and a lot of cool media to be consumed about it. So if you are a tabletop role-playing game enthusiast like myself, and you do not already have a copy of Monster of the Week by Michael Sands, go get yourself a copy. I got mine at Jetpack Comics. You can order them online from Evil Hat Production Generic Game. I forget which one it is. Order the book online from Evil Hat Productions. I'm pretty sure they also have PDF copies available, I think, for free, and a lot of materials, new stuff coming out all the time. But I really encourage you, go get the actual physical paper books. They're not very expensive. They are fun to read. Like I said, they read like a conversation, and it's enjoyable to read over and over again. You really only need one around the table, so there's really no reason that you shouldn't go and get yourself a copy of Monster of the Week and start playing it, unless, of course, awesome, spooky, paranormal stuff isn't your steez, in which case might I suggest Honey Heist, a one-page PDF role-playing game about adorable bears eating honey and committing honey-related thefts. All jokes aside, Honey Heist is actually a pretty awesome RPG. Super fun. Mega adorable. Play it. That's all I've got for today. As always, like, subscribe, share, all sorts of stuff. Tell me in the comments exactly why you think I am wrong, and I will reference the rule books to prove you otherwise. Monster of the Week is super awesome. So is Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, and Lasers and Feelings, and Honey Heist, and Numenera, and all of the other great games that exist. But Monster of the Week, it's just super good. Go get it, and like, and share, and subscribe, and all this stuff, Instagram and Facebook. I'm sure there's links somewhere around me on the screen somewhere, and if you're listening to this in a podcast form, you can't see anything. Anyway, see you next time.